I dare say that we are facing a possible risk of digital extinction of less used languages, what we call under-resourced languages. If you look at commercial systems that are providing AI solutions, you will see that they are best responding in English, and the coverage of other languages, especially from smaller countries, is not anyway at all at the level of the English language.
Hello and welcome to DGT Podcast, Languages and Technology, brought to you by the European Commission's Directorate General for Translation. I'm Anna Holmén, and in this episode we are going to talk about what the European Union's commitment to multilingualism means in the era of artificial intelligence. I have just the right man here to discuss this, namely the European Commission's Director General for Translation, Christos Ellinides. Welcome to the podcast, Christos.
Thank you very much, Anna. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and hello, everybody out there.
As we ask all our guests here on the podcast, what is your language journey, Christos?
Well, my mother tongue is Greek because I'm Greek Cypriot, so obviously that's my first language. I did my high school studies in an English school, so I also, and also for university studies, I did them in English, so that's my second language. When I joined the Commission in 2006, I was told that I need to have a third language. So that's when I started learning French, and French became my third language. So age doesn't matter, by the way. You can learn languages at any age that you like. And I think it is important for people to remember that. I always say it in any event that I have the opportunity that languages keep us young because it keeps the mind alert. Of course, I'm not a linguist. I mean, my background is purely engineering. I'm an IT geek, so I was always dealing with technology. But I believe that the way the language profession has moved and the translation profession, the language industry, towards a very, very much technological orientation, I'm well suited, I believe. I'm well placed, and I'm really enjoying it because it has been not just a language journey for me here in DGT, it has also been a technological journey in DGT.
Yeah, I have worked for DD Translation for decades, actually, and the transformation that has taken place over the years is impressive and very exciting, even though I'm not a tech person from the beginning. But it is so exciting also to see because many linguists, many of our colleagues here are among those who have been actively driving this transformation. And today, the work of DD Translation rests on three pillars. The first is, of course, high quality translation of EU laws and other texts. Second, editing and clear language to help the European Commission communicate better with citizens. And three, the development of multilingual AI tools. And this third pillar is what we are going to focus on in our conversation today. So, Christos, why is DG Translation a good place to develop artificial intelligence tools?
Well, let me just start by saying that languages remain at the core of DGT. And if we go back, just to make sure everybody is reminded about it, the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU in 1958, when we had still the European Economic Community, the first regulation that was adopted, and it's actually referred to as Regulation 1/1958, was about that all regulations and all documentation in the institutions should be drafted in all EU official languages. So that we should not forget. And it is important because it sets the context within which I'm going to answer the second part of the question. Why DGT? I will only highlight two reasons. There are more, but the two most important ones is that DGT has been dealing with linguistic data for the last 4 decades, collecting all of this linguistic data in all official languages. And AI is like an engine, and like every engine, needs petrol, fuel. The petrol or the fuel for AI is data. So if that doesn't exist, or if that is not in the engine will not work. So that is the first and most important thing. The linguistic data that DGT has gathered the last few decades is actually a treasure for DGT, and that's why AI is well positioned to be developed not only in DGT but in the language industry in general. The second reason is that people in DGT or people in the language industry have been working with AI since 2017, actually, 8 years ago. Not a lot of people are aware that we have introduced what we call neural machine language learning and translation in 2017. So we have developed the skill sets and the profiles within DGT of language professionals that can do AI coding and have been doing AI coding for the last 8 years. So the two together, the expertise in doing AI coding plus the treasure of linguistic data, makes it a very, very much a suitable place where AI can thrive.
The people and the data. Yeah, you mentioned this treasure trove of linguistic data we have. It's a database we call Euramis. And this data was first used to develop our own machine translation system, as you mentioned. E-translation, which is what the EU institutions use, as well as a number of external user groups. We'll get back to that, who can use it. But why do we need our own system? Why don't we just use an external product?
That is a very complicated question, and it would take a little bit more time to answer it than what we have right now, but I will try to be simple in my response to you. First of all, we are an institution, and as a public institution serving the European citizens, and as such, we need to be very careful in the various documents that we produce, that we draft, and that means that the terminology that we use must be very precise, accurate, and checked, which leads us to the fact that we need to have secure linguistic data, filtered, curated, and checked by professionals. And that's why we need to have it here in the Commission in the way we have it, and compile it in what you called as our linguistic data repository, which we refer to as Euramis. So that's the first and very important thing. The second is that we need to be compliant with the regulatory framework in how we use that data. And there is an EU framework that we are compiling, building over the last couple of years, starting from the AI Act. Before that, we had the GDPR, the data protection, data privacy regulation. And as we move on, we have more and more directives and acts coming into place to ensure that we are very respectful in data privacy and security, and we use AI in a trustworthy manner. The second thing that I wanted to say here is that we need to communicate in all languages with our citizens. Multilingualism is a democratic right that is part of the DNA of the European Union. And for that reason, I think we are ensuring with our own linguistic data the equal treatment of languages in the European Union. And that is not something that we can find outside in a broad offering. So the security, the regulatory compliance, and the fact that we need to cover all languages equally, I think builds the argument why we have our own linguistic data repository.
Yeah, and in any case, e-translation, the machine translation system, it's a success story. Last year, 890 million pages were translated with e-translation, And that high number comes from the fact that we make the system accessible to a number of external users. So not just EU institutions, but also public administrations in the EU member states, universities and students, small and medium companies, non-governmental organizations, and any project within the Digital Europe program, because we cooperate with our European Commission colleagues in DG Connect, an acronym that stands for Communications Networks, Content and Technology. And dear listener, if you listen to episode 3 of the podcast with Miguel de Batista from our prompt engineering team, who has a fascinating language story, by the way, you will remember what happened next in DD translation after e-translation. But let's hear it from you, Christos.
Sure. Miguel already covered some aspects of what I will also refer to here. But after e-translation, we embarked on a journey to develop AI-based multilingual services. The reasons I explained it, because we had the skill sets in AI coding and we had the linguistic data. The two together were the perfect playground for us to move ahead and develop AI-based multilingual services. And I emphasize the term multilingual because many AI services do not actually have the capability to produce on an equal basis outputs or process and produce outputs at par and with equality in all languages. Now, we keep talking about AI-based multilingual services, which is the second operative term I would like to explain, the services part. We are not in the business of developing chatbots like ChatGPT or this sort of AI systems. We are in the business of developing task-specific services, meaning that we take a specific task, whether that is produce a summary, produce a briefing, produce a translation, and we focus in getting data from the user, processing it, and producing a very precise output exactly for the needs of the label of the service. So in a chatbot, what you have is an engagement between the user and the system through a prompt. So a user injects a prompt in the system, gets a reply, maybe they upload few documents, then they have to, if they are not happy with the reply, they do another prompt to get a more refined reply, and so on and so forth. That's why it's called a chat bot, because you chat with the bot. In our case, all of these steps are automated. So the user uploads whatever documents they want to upload in our services in any language, in any volume, and they can even request what language they want to be, the output to be. And our system, just with the press of the button, processes them and produces a specific output, whether that's a briefing, a summary, a reply, and all the rest. So the both are necessary for any organization and any public administration. So it's necessary that an organization has a chatbot possibility, but also, and more in public administrations, I see that the possibilities of using task-specific services are also very important. Now, one of the biggest and latest, I think, services we produced is called e-reporting, which is very much geared to be used by organizations that have standard reports, annual activity reports, management plans, but also for those that are getting funding from the European Union. For example, a small to medium enterprise that participates in a funding program and receives money for a specific reason, then they have a reporting obligation. They need to go back and report to the member state most of the time, sometimes to the Commission, how they used the funding they received. So using a reporting, we enable the SME to produce a report based on the obligations that they have to report back to the authority. So that's a very good example of the services that we provide, which are not only restricted in the institutions, but also, like everybody knows by now, they are open to the whole of the European Union in terms of public administrations, NGOs, SMEs, academia, and so on.
So it's really simplification tools that we offer.
Let me be very clear. Our task-specific services are not there to replace anybody. Our task-specific services are there to replace exactly what they say, tasks. So what we are targeting is to simplify the delivery of tasks, routine mostly tasks, so that the colleagues, the humans, if you like, can focus on what requires more intellectual and creative capacity. So that is very important for people to understand.
And the best part is that what we have heard until now, it's really just the beginning. So we have one very exciting project on top of all this. And Christos, I leave this one to you.
One of the risks and dangers that we have identified as we move on with AI, and I always say, AI is still at its infancy. And it's not something that we can look at as a sprint where people run to get there to the finish line first. For me, it's a marathon. And we're still at the starting line. So for us, what we identified in these initial stages of the AI era or development is the inefficiency of language coverage. Actually, I dare say that we are facing a possible risk of digital extinction of less used languages, what we call under-resourced languages. If you look at commercial systems that are providing AI solutions, you will see that they are best responding in English, and the coverage of other languages, especially from smaller countries, is not anyway at all at the level of the English language. We did a sort of a survey of language coverage in many AI platforms and what we call large language models, which is the driving force behind AI systems. And in most of these LLMs or large language models, we see a coverage of 60 to 70% of the English language and 30 to 40% for all the rest of the languages. And that says something. On the top of that, for these large language models, we also identified that the predominance is split between the West and the East, between the United States and China. Now, why do I say that? Why are we so much interested in these developments of a large language model? Why are we looking at language coverage? I already explained, because it's a legal obligation for us, but also an ethical obligation to be able to communicate with all our citizens in their languages. But what we also discovered in these existing large language models is that there is lack of transparency on how the data is trained. There is bias. There is influence in the response that they provide because of their training. And there is also lack of control in these models. All of these elements and others have made us start thinking about developing a more trustworthy EU-oriented large language model. And that's what we did. We started actually, we used a European large language model that is out there and it exists from a French company called Mistral. And we injected it with our own Euramis, what we refer to before Euramis data. And we have trained it in 3 big supercomputers in our midst, and the results are very positive. We see actually an increase in the precision and accuracy of the quality of the output in different languages before we inject it with our own linguistic data and after. And that's why I think it is very important to proceed and develop, and we are in the process, and we can talk more about it if you want, about what I refer to as our own EU institutional large language model.
It's a truly European AI project all around.
Yes, actually, we are using as a basis a European LLM, and we are enhancing it with our own data. And by the way, I have to say that all the data that we are injecting it is fully proved and checked by professional linguists. There is a gap between the commercial offering and what we are trying to do, and we're trying to cover that gap. And it's not only about linguistic coverage. It's not only about security. It's not only about trying to affect influences and biases and remove them from the model. It's also about instilling in the model the EU values. And I'm referring to the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. I'm referring to the treaties. I'm referring to the way that we have as EU citizens in terms of reasoning, in terms of our own values, and in terms of the style that we communicate and we draft narratives. All of that as a context and as, if you like, guidelines, we are using to train our own large language model.
So it's not just about putting language back in large language model, but also covering EU content.
Yes, and that is exactly what we are doing. Covering, if you like, the EU way of thinking and living, our values. It's very important to do that, and it's a complicated project. We are not going to be competing, of course, with commercial projects or products. We will never be able to do that. So what we're producing is a niche large language model, which reflects exactly what I said, linguistic coverage and EU values, in the way I have explained them already. And we are using infrastructure in Europe for doing that. Specifically, we are using the supercomputers that the European Commission, together with member states, is deploying throughout Europe under the project called Euro HPC joint venture, Euro High Performance Computing joint venture. We're using 3 of those supercomputers, one in Bologna, one in Luxembourg, and one in Barcelona. And we are bringing together our expertise in AI coding, together with our language expertise, and the valued data that we have accumulated over the last few years. I do not expect ever that we will reach the magnitude in terms of size and volume of a commercial large language model, but I do expect that we will be able to cover the basic elements that I think such a model should have, built in Europe, owned by Europeans, maintained and used by Europeans. Now, I do not also want to sound too nationalistic as a continent, European Union continent.
I think that's okay. We can be a little bit European here, yes.
But it's true. It's true that we have been testing, of course, all of the rest of the large language models, and they have a lot of value too. But I think we have an additional value as a niche LLM to cover the gaps that the commercial LLMs are not dealing with.
Yeah, and we have been talking about the quality, about the elements of the different large language models, and it's quite interesting. This is something that I very recently learned, namely how you test this on a large language model. I've actually never thought about it, but you read about whether it's good or bad, this or the other LLM. So how do people know? There are, I've learned, so-called benchmark data sets, which are kind of a multiple choice questionnaire that you present to the model. So you test the model a little bit the same way as you test a student or a candidate looking for a job. And if you want to test a model's EU knowledge or language, you need EU-related questions in the benchmark data set. So we have a project on this too, that they just sprout up left and right, the AI projects. One thing leads to another.
Well, thank you for bringing this up, because it also will allow me to relate the effort that we're doing as a public administration, working with the academia and the industry in a triangle that I think is bringing a lot of results. First, let's start with what you said about benchmarking. Large language models are tested on language understanding. For the commercial products, mostly they're tested in English language and American context, so American way of thinking, most of those models. What we are doing with our model, we are approaching it with a new, I can call it a gold standard testing, which is the EU Massive Multitask Language Understanding, or MMLU, which is a multiple choice set of questions, but it uses EU-oriented language understanding as a test by Europeans, so that they know all of the official languages. So we are using an EU approach in terms not only of language, but also of understanding the context of the questions that we pose to the model. And we do it, like I said, across all EU official languages. Now, what we have done, we are running or we are coordinating a European Masters of Translation network. So there is about 80 universities throughout Europe that offers master's degrees in translation, and we are working with them. And we have asked them whether they would be interested to work with us in this testing, so that students could also be involved and universities can also be involved in our efforts in developing this EU institutional LLM. The response was very positive. As we speak right now, there are about 200, 250 students from, if I remember correctly, from about 20 plus universities in Europe doing tests to our EU LLM that we're developing. And that is a very nice way of involving all the different stakeholders and entities in Europe towards the direction of an EU-oriented LLM. And this is, of course, all of these tests, as I said, are accompanied by a list of principles and values that we carry in our tests. So the questions are such that reflect the European way of thinking.
Yes. Well, I have actually heard that there are large language models that are developed without any involvement of linguists, but here we are also showing students new language professions, place for them working with AI with their linguistic expertise.
I can tell you, Anna, that I get the question many, many times, will this profession survive? Well, I start with a very simple approach. This profession has survived already AI for the last 8 years. Other professions were not even close to what this profession has been doing the last 8 years in AI. So that's the first thing that I would like to say. But the second thing I would like to say is that the reason that this profession survived was because there is an adaptability and agility in the DNA of a translator, of a language professional, that they can adjust and they can redevelop their profiles and their skills in such a way so that they respond to the evolution of the profession based on the technological developments. And this is exactly what has happened now, and this is what exactly will be happening in the future. In my opinion, and many people have heard me saying that gradually I'm using the term language professionals as opposed to translators, because a language professional term covers a lot more things than just translation. And this is what this professional will be doing. You refer to Miguel, who is a prompt engineer. So that's one area where language professionals can be very good at. Who is better to master natural language? Natural language processing comes with language professionals. So that's prompt engineering. Now the testing of data, the curation of data, terminology, quality control of LLMs, instilling values in the training of LLMs, and a lot of other specializations around the area of language professionals is what I think we will be having. Of course, what is the element that remains constant? And let's not forget it, is language knowledge. So you can only do this if you have the language knowledge. And translation will still be there, but it will be performed as already it has evolved, it will be performed in a differentiated way.
Let's go back to the EU institutional large language model and the benchmark dataset. Will they be available outside the EU institutions?
The first version of the EU LLM is out. We already are using it in one of our services. We have a platform where all our AI-based services are hosted, and everybody can, I said who can use it already. And we have introduced at the back the service which we refer to as eSummary, the first version of the EU LLM. So if you go to that portal now and you choose the eSummary service we provide, you will be already using our EU LLM, not the rest of the services. Gradually, we will be moving it into the reply service, to the briefing service, and all the rest. But for the eSummary, is out there. We are using it and offering it ourselves in our services. We will also offer the model as such, as an open model available to be used by, first of all, anybody within any institution. We will be publishing it on a platform that institutions can access it. But we will also offer it on the European language data space sort of approach and posted there as an open model to be used by anybody that wants to introduce it in their efforts or in their developments in AI. I am using specifically the term open model and not open source because those that get this model will not have access to the data that we use to train it. They will have the results of the training. So that's what the LLM gives you, the results of the training. So they will get it as an open model. And what they can do is they can use their own linguistic data to improve, for example, the capacity of the model in delivering results in a particular language that they wish to. So a Slovene public administration, SME, NGO, whoever can take it. They can introduce more Slovene linguistic data on top of what we are offering as an open model and rework it. So it will be and this time is going to be an iteration. We will be, of course, producing a second version of the EU LLM and so on and so forth. But it will be offered as such in this way. And I would like to say that, and related also to an announcement that our president made last week, which was the technical sovereignty package released. So this includes two legislative proposals. One is the CHIPS 2 proposal, which identifies more the need for being independent in producing semiconductors and hardware in Europe. And the second is about the cloud possibilities in Europe and AI developments. Now, all of this, what we are doing in terms of LLM, it's all of what we are also proposing as legislation and as strategy. And what I'm trying to say is that we are trying to walk the talk from a political point of view, using real concrete use cases of what we can offer. So I think, and I like to believe, that our efforts in the EU LLM go towards the direction of technological independence and sovereignty of Europe, what also is referred to as the ambition to have an AI continent.
This really is a fascinating topic on so many levels. Is there anything more you would like to add, Christos?
How much time do we have? So no, I think that thank you again for hosting me in this podcast and getting a little bit of the highlights of what we're trying to do. The work on AI will not stop here. The work on developing LLMs will not stop here. Like I said in the beginning, we're still at an infancy stage, and it's our obligation to make sure that whatever we do, we produce AI developments, solutions that can be trustworthy, without any influences, without any biases, so that the people that use the solutions we provide feel confident that what they're getting is a credible service. And that's, I think, the summary of what the message is I would like to pass on.
Thank you so much for your time, Christos. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. As we have from 1958 onwards, we're staying committed to multilingualism in the European Union. And at DG Translation, we never shied away from the latest technology, so it is a very dynamic place to work, with its passion of languages coupled with experimenting on and developing technological solutions. You can find more on this if you go to our website, Multilingualism, Translation and Language-Based AI Services. From there, you can access the AI-based services if you belong to one of the eligible user groups. Thank you for listening to DGT Podcast, Languages and Technology. Stay in touch and share your thoughts or questions with us on Instagram or Facebook at Translating for Europe. And don't forget to subscribe in your favorite podcast app to stay up to date with the latest on EU multilingualism and translation. I'm Anna Holmén. Until next time.